So, good evening, everybody. We continue on in Perek Membeis, the 42nd chapter. We're holding today on page 120, in the middle of the page. And the Alter Rebbe actually begins, Kol Adam Yisrael Yid Mishiyeh, every Yid, whoever he may be, Kishi Yizbeinin Bazeh, when he ponders on this. On what? Gotta go back to the previous classes. We're obviously not going to repeat the entire Yizbeinin, so it went into about 2-3 classes. So, and understand the bazeh, you really have to appreciate what Alter Rebbe said in the previous 2 pages, namely the last page and a half. So we'll go right on, and you can find these classes on the TanyaOnline.com website, and it's very easy to access previous classes and all the classes. It's also very easy to follow. And because there's a separate scroll bar for the text, as such easy to follow the class with following along word for word on the text or line by line on the text. So when he says Bazeh, is pondering on everything we spoke about in the last few weeks. And so should we recap? We're not sure because it's going to take a long time, so we're not going to, but just to appreciate the Alter Rebbe is basically, he pointed out, he secured us of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu here, now, real, in the most, in our minds, most palpable manner possible. Again, this was the Alter Rebbe's brilliant explanation, literally showing us as human beings the actual presence of Hashem. Not only presence of Hashem somewhere hovering from above, but the Alter Rebbe predicates this, the important message here via the Rambam, the famous Rambam. The Alter Rebbe himself in Tanya brings it quite a few times. Alter Rebbe, Hashem knows everything by knowing himself. It's not that he's looking from where he is onto something else, even though he could have that perfect appreciation of what goes on apparently somewhere else, because he's God. He created ultimately everything, and therefore he can see everything. Ein davar na'el mimeka, but it's much more than that. There's nothing chutz mimena, there's nothing other than Hashem. So when Hashem sees what's going on in this room, the learning experience, the table with Tanyas and so on, and it's because nothing independent of Hashem. Knowing what's going on in his room is the way that Hashem knows what's going on in his room is because he knows himself. It's all part of Hashem. So because it's part of Hashem, his knowledge is much greater, and he is present in the place and in the area and in the subject that he knows. This is him. Again, we elaborate on this. It's worthwhile. Again, it's worthwhile to see the previous classes to appreciate the Alter Rebbe's culminating message over here once again. The other message in the very last week's class, sometimes when you know something was going on with yourself, not necessarily you can, especially you could have the accurate attention to the details of what goes on perhaps with yourself because you're impacted with what goes on with yourself. We gave the example, someone pricks someone's toe, so he knows exactly, even though his toe is not in the same room. We gave the example, it's on the other side of the wall. He doesn't see the person pricking him, he doesn't see the needle, he doesn't see his own foot. But no one could deny and say, well, really maybe it didn't happen because you didn't see all that. I know it happened because I feel it. But yet, we can be distracted from the details of what happened now. Or maybe, like we said, maybe someone did something to his hand at that time. So he also knows it happens, but he can't analyze exactly what happened because he's impacted from the hurting of the prick to the toe, as an example. And sometimes even that itself is difficult to analyze because of the impact of the hurt. So apparently one would say, okay, Hashem knows everything, but there's so many millions and billions, and again, even in this very world, beyond that, trillions, and you could even say infinite, even though anything associated with Elam Hazeh, you can't really use the term infinite, but there's kind of, you could even, just to appreciate, there's infinite things which are going on every single second, and Hashem is part of Hashem's experience, but isn't he impacted maybe by the big stuff, let's say? So maybe he's not there really, or really caring, but maybe not that much caring of the small stuff. What am I thinking, doing, eating, looking? Because there's a lot of big stuff. So he knows, because he knows himself. but is there, do I have to be conscious about it? So here the Alter Rebbe says, yes, Hashem is not impacted by everything that goes on. So you have that dual advantage. In other words, when you think about Hashem's knowledge, Hashem's appreciation in certain matters, you have, on one hand, he knows it because he knows himself, so that's, by definition, the maximum clarity one could have in a manner. It's not you're looking from inside out. It is what is transpiring with you yourself. Conversely, Hashem has that advantage. They're not impacted by anything. And because not impacted, again, there's Alter Rebbe's Lashon, which we say every day, we say based on Psukim in Tehillim, which we quote, Alter Rebbe quotes elsewhere as well, that Hashem is not impacted. So he's not impacted by anything. So his knowledge of the very and focus and fixation, if you will, on every detail what transpires in front of him is just infinite. Meaning to say, there's nothing which could be, by definition, obscured and covered. Hashem had his attention on something else, doesn't exist. And again, you could see in the previous classes, that's the bazeh. When every Yid, and Alter Rebbe says Yid Mishiyah, doesn't have to be a tzaddik, a scholarly person, a special person, a pious, a devoted Yid, a pious Yid, Yid Mishiyah, because it's coming from the perspective of his neshama. Remember, we've learned that this is all about the Moshe which exists in every single Yid. And because it's embedded in every single Yid, again, here the Alter Rebbe used the Lashon Yid Mishiyah. If you remember, he used it in Perik Yud Ches, which was a very important message, that the Elokus, the Neshama, and the godliness which exists within the Neshama is, in essence, manifest by every single Yid. We say, in essence, manifest, which means, yes, by definition of what the neshama is. It says that even Mereisha Vadragel, the Alter Rebbe says, if you don't see it on the surface, it doesn't mean that essentially it's not manifest throughout the entire system. It exists, rather. It exists in a certain perspective. It's manifest as well, as Alter Rebbe proves. That's the same Jew, which maybe was a bit indifferent with a particular mitzvah, but when it comes to the question of announcing or renouncing the oneness of Hashem, he's always there. So in essence, it filters through the entire system, Lashon Alter Rebbe, Mereisha Vadragel, from head to toe. And even someone on the surface, he's considered a Pesha Yisrael, someone who sins, or Chman Litzlan. On the surface, remember we mentioned once, Zer Nefesh Kisechta Bitmiya Tova, the Ginnazeir says, how can he get sin? But on the surface, someone is classified because of certain actions, a Pesha Yisrael, but nonetheless, he also has that neshama, that ain't so filtering through the entire system. There, the Alter Rebbe also uses Lashon Yeh Mishiyah, whoever it is, and here the Alter Rebbe uses it again for the same reason, because you're dealing with something which is embedded, hence part and parcel of the neshama, which exists by every single Yid. By definition, if him is a Yid, him or her is a Yid. She is Beinin Bazeh, when he ponders on this, again, on this which we mentioned, which we learned the last few weeks, of the Eibishter's presence in that fashion, of the Eibishter's knowledge, the appreciation of matters in the fashion we explained. Shog Gdeilu B'chol Yom, a long hour every day. What is a long hour? Isn't an hour 60 minutes? An hour is an hour. What does it mean, a long hour? It's because here Shog doesn't mean an hour on the clock. It means an expansive time. Every person is different. Alter Rebbe even noted in this very chapter over here, there's certain people based on the makeup of their neshama. Again, explained with Alter Rebbe, even though we all have a neshama which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hashem is one, and neshamas are one, but as they journey through all the elements, the certain neshamas which are impacted by the inferior world. Again, not to go into it now. So yet the neshama certainly lived and continue to live a cleaner life. So their neshama dikait, the soulness, if you will, is manifest by them. So in order for them, in other words, it's transparent by them, and therefore in order for them to appreciate this result of this pondering, it just takes 10 minutes. That's already for them a shog gdoila, an expansive hour. There's certain people, maybe an hour on the clock is also not enough. They really have to do a bit more, based, and again, from the way they're carved, the neshama is carved. We mentioned also, we can never say, it's always important to know when the Alter Rebbe points this out, it's a sensitive topic, because no one could ever say, oh, you know what, I wasn't sensitive to Hashem's command because maybe in my neshama comes from. First of all, how do you know where your neshama is, where it was impacted from, and its journey and its odyssey down into this world? You have no idea. So, and number one, even if you did, Teira Achas L'Kol Hashem demands, hence gives the koyach to every single yid to be pure and clean, machshava dibur u'maisa, and thought, speech, and action when it comes to this which he's not meant to do, and then on the positive side which he's meant to do. And together with every guitar, it makes it easier to be melamed zchus, to find favor, conversely in another yid. But generally, everyone is different, and therefore, when a person says shog doyle, he doesn't say it on the clock. Everyone is different. What is a shog doila, a long hour for him? So when he ponders on this, for this little shog doila, b'chol yoyim, every day, as the Eibishter fills the supreme worlds and the inferior worlds, mamash, heaven and earth, mamash, 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 mamash. Really. Malay kol haaretz kavei mamash, again mamash. Hashem's glory fills this entire land, not one space devoid of Hashem's presence. Hashem's is Hashem Himself. Hashem looks and gazes and examines the intestines and the heart, your intestines and your heart, and all your actions, all your speech, and all your steps. He counts every step in what direction you're going. He counts. And if you think about that, understandably, tikava, and let's ponder on that as something real, tangible, based on, predicated on everything we learned in the last few weeks. Azai, then inevitably, tikava belibai, it'll be established in one's heart the fear of God for the entire day, the entire day. And even he starts his day at a proper time. Usually the right time is before one davens, which then he has a face-to-face, intimate encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then the whole davening sets the person's tone throughout the entire day. And a very different note, a very different tone, a very different note. It subliminates him and everything associated with him in the entire day. Even though periodically during the day, because of the distractions or the hustle-bustle which exists in one human being's life, and it could distract him from that profound focus on this, but nonetheless, he just has to give himself a little reminder. Just align to straighten things out. At that point, he needs to not to do that whole shog, that long hour. He just needs to yachzer, to just repeat and ponder on this. I feel he's been kala, even with a light pondering, in every moment, in every hour, and or rather, the pauses after bizbein kala. So b'chol eis b'chol shah, in every moment, in every hour, yisur mirav aseitev. I believe it's the latter. But even though the message could be on the former also, I believe it's read with the latter, which means but the idea that whenever he has to kind of just reintroduce that thought, he doesn't have to go through the whole shah kala, right? When you have something set up and something goes wrong, you just have to put that little button. You don't have to reset the entire machine, as an example. And so too, just during the day when there is these distractions, sometimes almost inevitable distractions, just have realign. And then inevitably that will right away put you back on the conveyor belt of sur meirav asei tov. That one would be to stay away from evil. This is what Hashem says, again by definition. Hashem says not to do asei tov, and this is what Hashem says to do, the positive in thought, speech, and action. B'machshava dibur u'maisa, in thought, in speech, and action. Which in all three there is the don't and the do. Hashem says not certain things not to do, certain things not to speak, and certain things not to think, not to entertain one's mind. A pasuk explicit in the Torah, the third parsha of Kriya Shema. And so too when it comes to doing, it's the doing the mitzvah, which is about action, and then there's mitzvahs which we do with our speech, of it benching and davening and learning and making a bracha and so on. And then there is with our thought, which is our investment, investing our thought in the Torah, in hizbeinenus, in davening, pondering in the greatness of Hashem, and so on and so forth. So that would become the norm, the default throughout the entire day, every moment, not to rebel, God forbid, in the eyes of Hashem's honor, which fills the entire land. Like the saying of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his students, like we said before, that when they gathered around him, I believe it's right before he passed away, they're waiting to hear great chidushim from him. And perhaps they heard, but one of the things he told them, don't sin, basically. He said, fear God like you fear another human being. That when another human being is present, you refrain from doing bad stuff. And he says, at least fear God in the same manner. Just have that appreciation that Hashem is here and now, just like another human being. And you cannot make a mistake when another human being isn't in that same domain, the same room. And as such, the human being refrains from doing something wrong. Or if he has to do something good, because the other human being is demanding it from him, if it's a boss or anybody else, or somebody wants to find favor, or in any circumstance, it's real, it's tangible. So too, he said, that's the same way you should look at your Creator. Before you climb on the higher levels of Yira, the simple Yira, Hashem is here, Hashem is now, Hashem is Malek Kolaretz Kaveda, so he's a Beichin Kleis Valev, examines heart and intestines. If you're serving him accordingly, in a befitted manner. And this is the basis of Rabbi Yochanan's message to them. It was simple, but not that simple. Sometimes we, as in life, we take the simple stuff and we make them not that simple, or we ignore them. Sometimes religiously, ignore things which are so simple, but because of this simple, it's like not sophisticated, and therefore let me go into things which are deeper and relegate the stuff which are simple. So it seems simple, but the message is very stark, it's profound, it's very clear, it's very poignant. It's a message which you cannot make any mistake. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was really telling them, when someone walks into the room, you can't say, well, maybe this is an image, maybe this is a shadow, maybe this is not real, maybe this is just a glaze, just a ray of something. No, there's a person there. You know there's a person, and you make no mistake that someone is in the room with you. And when you look at Hashem in that same fashion, and Rabbi Yochanan's message is to look at Hashem in the same exact fashion. He's here and now, focusing on what you're going to do, think, and speak, do, speak, and think in the next moment, in the next second. And this is what the pasuk says. Certainly there are different levels of fearing Hashem. One, appreciating the aura of Hashem's greatness, Hashem being the king, Hashem being the Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the king of all kings. The idea of Hashem's Ein Sof, when one ponders on the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Yiras HaReimim is that exalted, special, unique type of Yira, obviously exists, and there's many levels. If you learn even a little Tanya or other areas of Chassidus, there's so many levels of Yiras Hashem. And in essence, they're all embedded in the Neshama. But they're to be extracted, extrapolated, and dealt with and worked on in order to the person should come to his shleimus, to his completion as a Yira Shamayim, a true God-fearing Jew. But the pasuk says, before you go to all those important levels of Yira, you should know I have a Yira for you, which is about Lelechas B'chol Derechov, just to go in Hashem's ways. In other words, that's the Yiras Hashem, which is going to perfect the thought, speech, and action. That's the type of Yira what we're talking about over here, and that's the type of Yira which is eluded or explicit in that pasuk. Hashem says, Ki im li yiras Hashem lekecha, which again, this is the same Yira which Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Am Yisrael, which the Alter Rebbe begins this chapter, and the quoting that Gemara Ota Yira Milsa Zutrase is Yira something small that Moshe Rabbeinu says, well, what is Hashem already asking from you? And again, as we explained the question of the Gemara at the very beginning of this chapter, which you can see it, probably the first class on the 42nd chapter. And the pasuk continues, because we're dealing with a Yira which is about going in Hashem's ways, which is the Yira Mevil Ki Mitzvah, the fear which brings to fulfilling Hashem's mitzvahs b'sura mirah, in staying away from this which Hashem says not to do, v'asei tev, and this what Hashem says to do. And this is considered Yira Tata. This is considered the inferior Yira Hanal, like we mentioned before. Uvagaba Moshe. And when the Gemara says that in yes, in the face of Moshe, or by Moshe, it's something small, it's something trivial. The Gemara didn't mean to ignore what the pasuk is really saying, that Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to Am Yisrael. He wasn't dealing with himself. No, the Gemara is saying, in the face of Moshe, which exists within you, Yid, as each Yid has this Moshe embedded in him, and in the face of that Moshe, it's something small, meaning you say, because this is part and parcel of who you are. And what is part and parcel of who you are? The Moshe Rabbeinu, which he imparts as das, that clarity and elokus and godliness. And again, that's a program which he embedded into every single Jew. And as such, when you tap into it, the Yirah Shamayim, the fearing God, which would lead to a life of Torah mitzvahs, again, in the Sur Merah, this Hashem says not to do. Be careful, this Hashem says not to do. Be very careful, this Hashem, and to be careful, this Hashem says